Hello there. I assume most of you are familiar with the GRE, the Graduate Record Exam, or as a Whitworth Core 250 professor once referred to it as, the Guardian Requisite Exam. Props to you if you know who said that. Now, the GRE is essentially the SAT, but for grad school instead of for college. It's interesting in that it's an adaptive test, so if you do well on a section, your next section of that type will be harder. If you do poorly on a section, your next section of that type will be easier. And unfortunately, easy sections mean you can't score maximum points, so you're limited in the amount of points you can earn if you do poorly on your first section of something. Now, the GRE is a frustrating test because it's expensive, it's long, and the research says that it is not a good predictor of your ability to succeed in graduate school. But if it's not a good predictor of your ability to succeed in graduate school, then why are we taking it? Well, the short answer is graduate schools ask for it. You see, the GRE fills a gap. It's a lot like GPA, but unlike GPA, where, think about your school. If you have more than one professor teaching the same subject, one of those professors will be easier to get an A from than the other. Regardless if it's psychology or anatomy and physiology or kinesiology or writing, one of the professors will be easier to get an A from than the other. This is due to the large amounts of freedom that college professors have in designing their courses and in their assignments and how they choose to grade and what they choose to grade on. When we think about that, there are even bigger differences between different colleges. This has been my experience, that one college, you take a course and it's much easier than at another college, and that in colleges, courses tend to be at about the same difficulty level. So at College 1, they're all about, let's say, a 7 out of 10, and at College 2, they're all about an 8 out of 10, and at College 3, they're all about a 4 out of 10. And so there's sort of a culture there, and they tend to hire the same types of people, and people live in those same areas and want to work there, and so you end up sort of getting a whole college that's at about the same level. Not everybody is. There's variation within colleges like we've talked about, but when you're comparing GPA, this means you're comparing apples to pears. Whereas with the GRE, even though people are taking different versions of it at different times with different questions, we may not be comparing strict apples to apples in terms of this is a Gala apple and this is a Gala apple. We might be comparing, well, this is a Fuji apple and this is a Golden Delicious apple and this is a Fuji apple and this is a Braeburn apple and this is a Honeycrisp apple. But they're all apples at least. And so there's some utility in that. And it sort of counters that issue with GPA varying by professor and university. And so that's a large reason why it's used to supplement the GPA. The other reason it's used is that it gives them a easy cutoff. Most of the schools I applied to had between 250 and 350 applicants every year. That's a lot of materials to go through. And they only have 5 spots, maybe 8 if they're a huge program, at least in the PhD programs in clinical psychology. And so they need some way to bring it down. Having an application fee is one way to bring it down, because if it's free, you get way more applications. But GRE scores of, well, if we require them to have 155 on verbal reasoning and quantitative reasoning and a 4.0 on the writing, we can just cut off anybody who's below that, because they didn't listen to directions. And then we can use it as a ranking thing of, well, we said this was our minimum, but we have so many applications that the top 74, and I don't know why I chose 74, it's just a good number, but let's say the top 74 ended up with GRE scores of 160 and above. And so we just cut off 160 and above, and we look at those 74, and if we can fill our 5 spots from them, great. If not, begin expanding to lower GRE scores. And so studying for the GRE is important. It's one of the sort of gatekeeper things of, is my application going to be looked at? Having the right GRE scores means that you have a better chance of having your application looked at, and so the rest of your materials that you put so much effort into, those letters of intent, letters of recommendation, everything else can be seen and can argue for why you should be offered an interview and then offered a spot. Now, having great GREs and terrible everything else means your application might be looked at and then discarded because, well, the rest of it doesn't line up. It's not good enough. And so as a holistic package, everything needs to be good, but the GRE scores are sort of that gatekeeper thing of, is the rest of it going to be seen? So I'd say that even though the GRE is expensive and frustrating and time-consuming and really has no bearing on most graduate work, it's important to be good at it. And fortunately, we can be good at it because, as we've already talked about, ETS already sends out free materials that you can find on their website about the questions, and they're very accurate as to what you'll see on the test. And then you have all these other resources. So it's possible. It isn't easy to become good at the test, but it's possible. You can see that I'm no outstanding person, and I did fine. 94th percentile on the verbal reasoning, 58th on the quantitative, and 82nd on the writing. That's perfectly acceptable, at least for the schools I was applying to. Now, I didn't get into the PhD programs I applied to, just the master's program. So perhaps my GRE scores held me back from some of those PhD programs. Perhaps not. I will never know. But I am content with where the scores are at, and I will not be retaking this test. It's too much effort into something that I have already passed the minimum standards, and there are other areas that are more important to my future career. So I'm going to focus on those. Now, if you're interested in hearing about how to work on the verbal reasoning section, I have some ideas for that. I'd be glad to share them in another video. I'll probably get around to it eventually. If you want to see it sooner, let me know down in the comments. For the quantitative reasoning, there are people much more capable in that section than I am, so I'm just going to avoid it, leave it to you to find someone who is competent in that area, or perhaps find a tutor. For the analytical writing, I didn't study this section. It's not important to my field of study, so I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it. Again, I'll leave it to someone else to teach you how to do that properly. Then finally, for our psychology test or subtests, I can't tell you exactly what to do here. I don't think it's worth its own video. It's really just learn all this information about each of these sub-disciplines. Essentially, you just find a book and go through it and learn all the information there about who founded psychology and what was the duck thing and what did Chomsky do and who did the language acquisition device and who was this and who was that and how does this work and what is this, and it's basically memorization. And so I'll leave you with that. It's a frustrating test, but you can be good at it, and I'd encourage you to be good at it, but not to the point where you're excluding effort that would be better spent on the other parts of your application. So until next time, cheers.